I did not anticipate the blue light shining through the middle of his face.
It's like a nose.
Oh, it is a nose.
Yeah.
Do you already have one picked out?
I do. So I was initially going to do scenes from a hat.
Okay. My scheme in driving over here was I was going to ask for your, like, dirtiest, nastiest tea. Like the tea where you drink it, it kind of gives you stank face. And you're like,
I do have one of those if you want.
It's how I'm going to support my villain arc. So every time I drink the tea, I just look really angry all the time.
Actually, that would be very on brand because the last episode with Dave, I talked about the Lapsang Sujong tea, where it smells like campfire smoke, and it's very strong.
Awesome.
Do you just want to smell like fire?
Is that the one you have?
So initially, I was thinking we would do some Japanese green tea.
Okay.
So, but 2 different kinds. So I was thinking we could do like an actual traditional matcha.
Okay.
And then the second one being a genmaicha, which is a toasted rice sencha tea that's been like my favorite recently. But also, if you want to go for campfire smoke, I'm not going to stop you.
I want your dirtiest, nastiest,
all right,
like most filthy tea.
All right.
Do I have any good dirt on Steffi?
Okay.
She, one time, this is a little pro tip for all of you working at tea shops. Don't go into work dressed like you are going into a club if you work with a bunch of stingy old doctors, and specifically in that situation. If you want to dress up like a club in your day-to-day life, Godspeed. But our wonderful hostess here almost got canned from her wonderful tea job at one point because I think she was coming straight from a gig or something, and she was like still wearing her like gigging clothes, which are, you know, a little more showy as is tradition for gigging. And like all kinds of nurses and doctors just threw a whole huge fit about it. And it became like this whole unnecessary big deal. So, you know, just be careful where you venture out in club wear.
I love doing tea. Well, one, like, it was like a health decision that I switched more from tea to coffee.
Other way around.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Did you know I woke up like an hour ago?
Same. Which is funny, because since I woke up and then listened to the last podcast, I've probably heard more of your voice today than you have.
Actually, probably. That was a lot of talking. Editing that was kind of weird, because I was like, I've never seen myself, like, I've never watched a full conversation of myself and had to edit it.
Which is hilarious, because you've edited so much of yourself singing.
Yeah.
But like so little of yourself talking.
It was so weird. I was like a little self-conscious, honestly, but not in a bad way. It was just like, oh, this is different. I've never done this before. Mm-hmm. And kind of like what Dave was saying, he's like, you're actually doing this. And I was like, maybe?
Am I?
Am I? Because I don't know. I'm just like at the point in my life where I'm like, just fucking send it.
Yeah, I think.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
This smells crazy.
Yes, give me the nasty dirty. It's like beef jerky and like the burnt residue after you like saute some veggies in a pan and you just kind of like leave it on the stove on accident. It gets singed and nasty. Mm-hmm. That's what it smells like.
This is what you asked for.
It is. The villain arc continues.
I'm very curious what this is going to taste like.
Shocked that you had something that level of like, oh, you want filthy? I got filthy for you. You delivered in spades.
Yeah, because I ordered a bunch of teas off of this wholesale account, and so these are all just actually like sample sizes, and it was like I tried most of them. Like I spent a day like trying all of them, but this one was so out there that I didn't try it because I was like, this is gonna wreck the rest of my tasting experience.
Yeah,
it's so strong.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Whoa! Oh, you get a shot of the top of that. That's very satisfying. It looks like the kind of decorations that you'd see in porcelain, where it's just kind of like a bunch of tightly knit shapes, except it would have to be blue, and in your grandma's cupboard.
Yeah, it helps like doing that helps open up the aroma a little bit more
Sure.
of the tea.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with the coffee world than the tea world, and I know that a lot of time brewing pour over, which tends to be the most flavorful. It's really important to let the coffee bloom for a little bit. So you just pour in a little bit of hot water to get the beans kind of releasing CO2. So I would imagine that there's something similar for the tea leaves, just to like quote unquote activate them.
Yeah, exactly. It's like part of it is like getting rid of some of the dust that collects on there, but also like it opens up the flavor profile that the tea can offer.
Can I smell it?
Yeah. So this is the wash. So we'll like sample a little bit of this. But we'll mainly sacrifice it to our Pikachu over here.
Yes. I heard on the last episode that you were talking about how like with the tea pets are supposed to, you kind of pick one that you want to like reflect where good things are going to happen in your life. So is this like reminiscent of some hope of yours to be a master Pokemon trainer? Is that the kind of vibe you're trying to put out, like
Actually,
Pokemon Master vibes?
At the bottom of the stairs, I brought back from the shop like a costume to be a fisherman, but it's an unfinished. Hold on, there's a tie to this.
I have questions, but continue.
But I never ended up wearing it because like the shop itself for Halloween, it like.
Oh, it was for Halloween.
It was, yes.
Okay, it wasn't just for fun. Like you didn't just happen to have a fisherman costume at the tea shop. Sorry to interrupt you, but is this the first pour?
No, this is the wash. So this is just like a
Okay.
sample of it before the first initial tasting.
Oh god, it's hard to smell.
I know, it smells straight up like just charcoal.
Drinking the wash feels like drinking dirty laundry.
Or G water, as Dave said last time.
G water. That's so funny because it tastes a lot more mellow than it smells. But what it's giving me, it has the same color as whiskey.
Yeah.
And because of like the little particulates in it, it honestly sticks to the edge of the glass, kind of like whiskey. And because this is such a smoky blend, it honestly has the same aftertaste as a lot of whiskeys.
Honestly.
So it's kind of like, weirdly, this is like a whiskey.
Whiskey tea.
Yeah, it's like whiskey coated, you know?
This
Where,
might
like,
actually make a very interesting iced tea. Like imagine this as an iced tea with lemon and sweetened just like lightly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you can do all kinds of fun stuff. The flavor's great. The flavor is nowhere near as assaulting as the smell.
I feel like it just changed a little bit.
Oh my god, that's way mellower. I mean, you could look back on the footage, and every other time that I've smelled this tea, I've like recoiled. But that one was just pleasant.
Yeah, it almost like opened up like a floral tone or something like a stone fruit.
Nowhere near as sharp as the first smell was. The first smell was like somebody crawled inside my nose and punched me.
It was very
pleasant.
Yeah. It's that's a lot nicer than I was expecting.
I'm impressed with the journey that this tea just went on and that we accompanied it on.
That's the really cool thing about like tasting teas like with a Guy Wan and doing like a gung fu style is like you get to really see the adventure like in real time of like where something starts versus like where it ends.
We've just embarked on the hero's journey.
We really have. Now we're like
we were so ignorant at the start and made friends along the way, like our little Pikachu tea pet.
Oh yeah, so the fisherman outfit.
Oh yes. You were saying.
I was originally going to get some like Pokeballs and be like the Pokemon, like the fisherman Pokemon trainer.
Oh. I remember at one point I had I had all kinds of random little Pokemon toys because I played the games a lot when I was in like elementary school.
That's why we get along so well.
It's a type. There's like, well, I was going to say this, but I think you might be an example of both. I was going to say there are like SpongeBob kids and there are Pokemon kids. There is also like a Venn diagram where there's a cross section in the middle. I was a Pokemon kid.
There's also My Little Pony kids.
Yeah, but there's also My Little Pony 30-year-old men. I'm going to be really annoying for a sec. I'm going to just pull the banjo down because it's actually driving me a little
I'm going to
crazy.
go from 2 subscribers to no subscribers so quickly. I just got that actually. When I got my grandpa's guitar finished restoring, like I've been thinking about getting a banjo for like months. And finally I was just like, you know what? it. Because I used to take banjo lessons, funny enough.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've played banjos before, but never like learned. My grandpa used to play banjo. Here's a little banjo shot for you. Wow. But my grandpa, it's kind of hilarious. It's like something out of a cartoon, but my grandpa used to play banjo. And when my mom was growing up, they grew up in a cul-de-sac. My grandparents still live in that same house. And there were like other kids in the cul-de-sac, so they would all be like playing outside and hanging out, and this was, I guess, like 60s, 70s.
Wholesome American dream.
Yeah,
like
very
the Sandlot.
much. Yeah, and like my mom's side of the family, total blue collar, like they're all teachers, like very humble. So in like summers or after school and stuff, all the neighborhood kids would be like out playing in the cul-de-sac, and then my grandpa would just be sitting on the front porch with his banjo, just like picking, which is hilarious because he's not like a country guy at all. He's not like an outdoorsy type. He's like super into baseball, American old man.
I'm picturing your grandpa as literally James Earl Jones from The Sandlot.
Yeah.
But with a banjo.
Yeah, and a lot paler. But
were you always like an audio kid growing up?
I was always a music person in some way. I have like some really funny old clips that I found of like me. I don't even know if you could call it songwriting, but just recording snippets of things on like the old family piano and stuff like that, and taking my first kind of steps towards teaching myself music. My parents tried to get me like piano lessons, and I hated taking lessons. I was like,
I feel that.
Yeah, the workflow just wasn't for me, and I hated just like playing annoying, plunky, 2-year-old songs where it's like there's 3 notes and you just play them each once, and it's like, yeah, you did it. That was just never really my thing. So eventually I just started playing other songs and stuff that I liked, and ended up teaching myself, and that kind of has evolved into today where I play a little bit of everything. And lately the endeavor has been drums, which has been super fun, just because like there's so many cool rhythmic things that are really hard to express with other instruments. And then also being in Nashville, there's such a high level of musicianship, especially tonally and melodically, that people are capable of. And it's a lot easier for me to like hop into a musical situation from a percussive standpoint, just because the level of like practical theory knowledge is not quite as intense when it comes to like melodics and harmonics.
And there's something primal about drums too, that, I never was drawn to drums, and it wasn't until I really like started dating Theo and playing with a band that I was like, oh, I get it. So Simon and I met through our friend Finn, because our friend Finn went to Blackbird as well, and I met Finn through my friend Rudy, who also went to Blackbird, who was in the same class as Finn. But then I also found out you went to Blackbird. So it's kind of fun that you and Dave and myself have all been to Blackbird. What was your Blackbird experience like?
Blackbird is such an interesting experience, but I don't think it's necessarily unique from a conceptual standpoint, in that, like in general, when you're going to pursue educational experiences as like your own choice, nobody's making you go to school to be an audio engineer. Somebody might make you go to community college or university, because there's so much familial pressure and stuff like that. But in situations where you're choosing to go and pursue something, they all kind of tend to embody this experience where it gives back to you in knowledge and experience and opportunity exactly in proportion to how much you invest in it. There were definitely people in my class and many other classes, and I mean, when I was in college too, they were just kind of there and they got very little out of it. And then when it was done, they just went home back to, whatever they were doing before, living with their parents or working at whatever jobs. There's no guarantee from having a credential that you're going to do anything with it.
Right. And I think that's something that I've learned, because I definitely thought my path at Blackbird would lead to me being an engineer and like working on sessions regularly. And I don't know, just being more in the industry than I am. I've had a lot of like regrets, especially like as I'm getting closer to a certain milestone in my life where I'm looking at things and being like, okay, like where did I fuck up? What did I not pursue to the fullest? Yeah. So before I was a huge dingus and didn't check to see if the camera was still recording, we were talking about Blackbird and engineering and the art of shutting up and all that stuff. And then I found out that Omni closed.
Yep, Omni, which is a huge kind of like historic studio in town here in Nashville, closed at the end of February. And it's one of those places where it's kind of up there with like places like Blackbird, Ocean Way. Is one of those names kind of like Sound Emporium, Blackbird, Ocean Way, like...
They're the kahunas.
And I don't know specifically what Omni's reason was for closing, but yeah, it's a pretty significant loss to the recording community.
So do you see a transition, like... I don't know if you've had much time to kind of think about the future of recording.
All the time. It's an active worry because it's my career.
Yeah, especially with more people being like, I can just do it in my bedroom.
The way that we create music has definitely changed a lot. And I think things being accessible is a good thing. You know, you can't have your cake and eat it too. There's that phrase. I think another big thing along with the whole bedroom producer, anybody can record anything reality is people are like, oh, music's so saturated now. There's like a million things. Anybody can post anything. And there's just all this garbage you have to sift through. And like, you know, you can post something to Spotify and only get one listen from a bot because there's just too many people posting things and it's impossible. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because everybody can record. It's kind of like if you've seen The Incredibles, if everyone's super, no one is, which is a kind of a negative way of looking at it. And I don't necessarily think it's that negative of a thing, but like, if you're going to give everyone access, you also have to be okay with the fact that everyone's going to be able to do it, which is a problem for studios that previously were the resource for making that happen.
I guess it's going to kind of come down to what you would use a studio for.
Totally.
Specifically, like, you work with a lot of string sections and like jazz bands.
Yep.
And so like you need an actual like a space to go to bring people together like that.
Yes, and I think that's the thing that's the limiting factor, I guess, which I guess I've never made that distinction, but it's definitely there, is that while the equipment used to be gate kept and is now widely accessible, spaces have become arguably even less accessible just because everything is so expensive. And if you want to rent like a nice space to record in, even if it's not a studio, if you just like find a warehouse that sounds cool, like you then also have to bring in all of the gear to record there. Spaces are still very inaccessible. And that's the area of the industry where you still see profit from a recording standpoint, is because you can't track a 60-person orchestra in your bedroom. You can't track a 20-person orchestra in your bedroom. Even if you could fit 10 people in your bedroom because you have a really big bedroom, you lose the quality of recording because those instruments need a big open room for the sound to truly like bloom and breathe. It's kind of like if you're listening to guitar, you would rather be sitting like 5 to 10 feet away from the person playing guitar than like sticking your ear inside of the sound hole or like right next to their finger where they're playing. It's a completely different experience, and it's not necessarily capturing what you think of when you say like, I want to hear a guitar. And that kind of extrapolates out to what you see in the string community, where you need to have these big rooms that kind of let the sound carry and bounce and reflect, and you just need that in order to capture that kind of sound. And you can do things where, you record one instrument at a time in a bedroom and stick a mic all the way up here and you're playing down here. But the sound of you layering a couple things is very, very, very different from getting the sound of an entire space with an entire community working together inside of it.
Moving forward with what a studio space would be used for, not only for like the actual room itself, but also like a vibe. I mean, people can create vibes and curate spaces in their homes, but there's something to curating like a studio that's so, I think, crucial to the survival of the industry. And I think about that with like third spaces for people as well, where it's like it's some place that you want to go and like hang out and just be there to revel in the space itself.
I agree in general, but as part of like places like Omni closing and studios going out of business, in the recording industry, you're kind of losing that luxury.
What would your ideal space be for a studio?
That's a difficult question. There are different angles that are appealing. I think with most modern production spaces, they're a production space. It's not a studio. You don't just go to say, I want nice speakers and sound panels and good microphones. You say, how can I make as much content as possible from this? How can I put cameras everywhere? How can I, have a set that can change in color lighting and photography studio, visual studio, audio studio, all of that stuff. From a business standpoint, the answer is just a space that does as much as possible because that's how you make a living. And as much as I like having toys and cool spaces, I also like not having to worry about, paying rent and mortgages and stuff like that. But ignoring all of that, if we were just like purely speculating on like what would it be like to
Simon's dream house.
Yeah, walk into like a dream space. It would probably look not too dissimilar from a lot of those big room studios in need of updating. Except hopefully mine would be, updated. There's a lot to be said for just a big open space that sounds good and feels good to be in. And not for any reason other than how it sounds or feels when you walk in the room. There are certain spaces I think you just walk in and like you get hit by a certain aura. I think like sports stadiums are kind of like that for people that are into it. I'm not, but like I grew up going to baseball games with my grandpa and stuff like that.
Go Twins.
Yeah, you're right. Hard being a Minnesota sports fan.
Yeah. Were you sad when the Metrodome closed?
Yeah, actually. 'Cause I went there all the time. Like I was going to baseball games before I could talk. Not because I wanted to, but because my grandpa would just like strap me up and be like, all right, maybe we're going. But also like the roof kept collapsing, so it was probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Just to kind of
Tie everything together.
Yeah, just wrap up that last thought just so I don't leave it hanging. A dream studio would just be a big open room. Like you walk in and you just kind of like the sound of your voice in that room. Like it just carries well, and like there's maybe a little bit of a tail on it where you like say hey, and like just the way that it kind of carries around the room, you're like, ooh, that's kind of cool.
I just thought of the that scene from Jim Carrey's Grinch where he's yelling into his space and he's like, hello, and it responds, hello, and he goes, I'm an idiot, and then the voice goes, you're an idiot.
I want that space. I don't know what kind of acoustic panels I need to make that happen, but that's the goal.
First, we will import a cave or a mountain with a cave in it.
Cool.
And then we'll build out said cave even more with levels.
It's like your evil, Bond villain mastermind who lives in, a mansion evil facility built in a mountain, except instead you just walk in and it's just like me with some microphones like, hey guys, want to track some jazz?
You and Theo, that can be your lair. That's his dream space.
Yeah. Well, Theo will actually run like the evil mastermind side of the lair. And I'll just be kind of like hanging out.
He'll run the moat.
Yeah.
And the drawbridge.
Yeah, I'll feed the alligators. I'll make sure we can get really high fidelity recordings of everyone he's torturing.
I'm thinking about maybe changing it up a little bit and doing something a little different.
Yeah, well, you were mentioning that sencha that you were super feeling.
There is an old wives' tale about how there was a samurai and he had an assistant named Genmai. The story goes that Genmai made tea for his samurai master, and accidentally some like popcorn kernels fell in the tea before he served it. And so he served it, and the samurai saw what happened and was so upset that he cut off the head of his servant. And then he tried the tea and he was like, this is amazing! So they named the tea after Genmai, so Genmai-cha.
It's like something that your grandpa would say to you or something. It's like, don't cut the head off the servant before you taste his tea.
So this one is different than the one I usually get from Jenny.
Ooh, that smells so pleasant. Talk about juxtaposition, like opposite end of the spectrum. This one's like, sweet.
We're bringing you with us on our bagel break.
I think the beginning of the year just tends to be a lot of reevaluating for people. Like there's a jazz label that I do a lot of work for, and they're like the main jazz client I have. And I end up like assisting on all of those sessions for people that aren't as familiar with the recording industry. On the recording side of things, generally you'll book a studio space. There will be a first engineer and a second engineer. First engineer is kind of the one who like directly works with the client, and it's like quote unquote their sound. So they're responsible for the sounds on the sessions, how everything turns out. Second engineer is there to help the first engineer get everything set up, get everything going, run it when they need to do other things. And the engineer is there to make sure the client gets what they want, and the second engineer is there to make sure the first engineer gets what they want. And by extension, the client. So I'm second engineer on a lot of those jazz sessions because they kind of have their guy. They work at this big studio space.
Do you want the rest of that? Or?
Oh, it's okay. You can dump it. And then, I just know the space really well, so I help make sure everything works and help with all of the recording on the sessions and stuff. But that label that I do a bunch of work for just sold their catalog last year.
Oh, shit.
After like decades, probably 30, 40 years of recording stuff. So it was kind of like, are they going to record music anymore, or did they just sell their catalog and they're done? But they are, and they have like a whole bunch of projects lined up for this year because I think they reached some deal with whoever bought the catalog where they're still working on stuff. So it sounds like there's going to be a lot more jazz session work coming up this year. Well, I feel like we've been hitting a lot of music notes. Hit me with some tea facts.
Tea facts?
Just some tea facts, some green tea facts.
Oh, goodness. Well, let's see. Green tea. I think one thing we didn't get into with the tea drunk definition in the last episode I did with Dave is we hit on the caffeine. Like everyone knows what caffeine is, which if you actually don't know what caffeine is, I don't know if I even defined it properly, but it doesn't give you energy, but it prevents you from getting tired. So it blocks certain receptors in your brain from signaling that you're tired. So that's what happens with caffeine. And so then there's the L-theanine, which calms your nervous system, but also boosts your mood at the same time. And then there's antioxidants and catechins, which just promote better cellular function. So like all those things work together in like an entourage effect that give you that state of just like feeling like blissed out, which is really just, it's, I don't know, especially when you get more into it and you can recognize the feeling. It's unlike any other thing that I've ever had in terms of a beverage. Like, you know, with being sick, I can't drink alcohol, can't really drink coffee. And so this has been like a safe haven. I probably honestly shouldn't be drinking tea either, but it's not as bad as the other two.
It's not as bad. Yeah, I totally get that. I had like an ulcer forming a couple of summers ago, which sucked. And you go on what's called the no fun diet, which is basically anything that's enjoyable to eat, you can't. So like anything fried, anything greasy, like anything things spice. Like acidic or spicy. Yeah, like no chocolate, no coffee, even things like tomatoes and so many things.
And grapes probably too.
Yeah, just anything that's acidic is a no-go. Anything greasy, anything acidic. So in that time, I started drinking a lot more tea because I was like, I'm not just going to cold turkey quit drinking warm beverages that make me happy. Being happy is also important.
And it actually is very healing to the body. And it would be so cool to, and I've talked to you about this pipe dream, but having a third space that's like a tea bar, but it kind of is reminiscent of like a bar. And you could like sit at the bar and like talk to your bartender, but they do like a tea setup like this and they break down like the different notes and certain teas you want to try. And then there's like also like a lounge area where people can chill and do like more like teapot style service. And then like there's like a back room where during the day you can still sit there and eat and get, you know, tea and stuff, but it plays like black and white films. And then at night, it's actually like a venue and you can like have performances there or like have plays or musicals or TED Talks or whatever and have it be a very multi-purpose auditorium space. I would just like, I think about this all the time when I'm leaving work and I don't want to sit in rush hour for an hour. I'm just like, man, I wish there was just a space I could just go get a cup of tea and just like sit and read for a little bit, you know, and the library is like the closest thing to that, but the library needs to be vibier. There needs to be some like velvet curtains, some like
someone
lounge
needs to go pimp
wear.
out the library. I agree. I'm gonna put that on the next petition when we have local elections.
Yeah,
we need
pimped
to
out
pimp
libraries.
Out the library. I want to vote for someone who is dedicated to pimping out our local library. I totally agree. Like I love spaces, like chill spaces open late.
Yeah, and the pandemic just ruined that for so many places in Nashville. I feel like Cafe Coco was kind of a space like that.
Well, I think it's difficult with those spaces because the business model doesn't really make sense. I mean, to have somebody come in, buy one thing, and then stay there for hours on end isn't necessarily profitable.
I think the fun part about this is that I can like make it whatever I want. And I think that's what I've always needed in doing something like this. Because whenever I did like trials for my More Media podcast, I was like, oh, it has to be people in the industry. And like, I don't know. I put way too much pressure on it and didn't just let it be. And I feel like with tea, it's just such a random thing that you could bring anybody into and like learn something together.
If you look at like, there are so many little communities on like YouTube and other social platforms and stuff like that, where like, I guess the most mainstream example would be look at like Mr. Beast. And they are not qualified individuals. They are not, it's just like a guy with an idea and a couple of his idiot friends. And we
love them.
Like, yeah, and that template just works because it's so relatable. Nobody wants to like hear someone who explicitly talks to the people that are at the top of the industry, blah, 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 blah. You know, there's a place for that, but like, it's not relatable.
Yeah.
If you're just a bunch of idiots, which I think we fall under that category.
I was trying to say something clever and then my idiot brain just deep fried.
Perfect example, baby. I would say most of our friend group falls under the category of just a bunch of idiots. Extremely capable and intelligent and wonderful idiots, but idiots nonetheless.
How are you feeling about this tea so far?
I like it. I have much less to say about it than the nasty, dirty smoke tea. But not because it's really good. It's what I would have expected.
This is the full circle moment of your villain origin story where your heart grows 3 sizes.
Yeah, and it's kind of Grinch colored too. Anyway, it's like a little green, so it works. Right out of high school, my kind of life goal was I wanted to travel to a new continent every year. And I was making pretty good progress. Right when I graduated high school, I just like worked since I was like 15 and never did anything with it. I like never spent money, so I just had a bunch of savings. So I used a chunk of it and went with Ayala, my friend who you met. And we went and traveled around like Eastern and Central Europe for like a month and a half right out of high school. Like we graduated and like a month later we were in Europe. Then the next summer, I had a philosophy professor who taught at a school in Korea, in South Korea. And we just became close. And he asked me to come be a TA for him over in Korea that summer. So I ended up going over to Korea, teaching at a university there for a month. And then because I was so close, I was like, well, might as well backpack through Japan. So literally took a boat from the southernmost point of Korea over to Japan, started in like the very, very southernmost bottom part of Japan down by like Nagasaki, and then just backpacked my way all the way up through to Tokyo.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah, which was super cool. But pro tip about Japan, if you're going to go backpack there, go with a friend. Because it's hard to meet people, because it's just not what the country culture is set up for. In Europe, you can backpack by yourself and have like 10 new best friends within 5 minutes of stepping in like any new place. Japan is not like that. It's just not what the culture is. My favorite place that I went to on that trip was actually, there's this little mountain town just kind of like east of Mount Fuji. I wanted to hike Mount Fuji. And I was going to do it 2 different times, and both times a typhoon hit Mount Fuji. So I was like, well, I guess I'm not hiking Mount Fuji. My goal was travel to a new continent once a year. And then the next summer, I was set to study abroad in New Zealand. Got to New Zealand. They had said that they were like reserving all of the classes that I needed to graduate. Got there, they had reserved none of the classes that I needed to graduate. I was like, if I stay here, I'm going to have to do another year of college. So I ended up I was there for like 2 weeks and then went home.
I didn't realize how cultured you were. I mean, I knew, but I didn't know all these stories.
Yeah, I've got stories. I don't know. I don't know. I don't like, I feel like I always end up talking about it too much and sounding like pretentious, so I don't bring it up very much. But yeah, it used to be a huge thing. Was
there like a specific moment in life that kind of made you like that, like a turning point from that?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think once I was kind of at the end of college, and like I had a really fast track through school because I fucking hated it, but was really good at it. So I graduated high school. I graduated high school in 3 years, and I graduated college in 3 years. I've always hopped around a ton. For a long time, I was very like if I didn't have a drastic change within a certain amount of time, I would get really like antsy and anxious and depressed. It's kind of the opposite, I think, of a lot of people. Because a lot of people are like, I have my way that I like to do things, and if I have to change that, it like kind of throws me off. And even in less extreme cases than that, like people feel comfortable with what they know, and like drastic changes tend to be really jarring. But for me, it was like if I don't have a drastic change, like I'm just like, what am I doing? I'm just sitting here wasting my time, like. So it took a while to get over that, but eventually it kind of got to a point where it was like, I'm doing all of this work, I'm doing all of this traveling, but like, what for? At a certain point in like the Japan trip, towards the end, I was like, I've been backpacking for so long, just pretty much by myself. And like, there's tons of amazing shit that I've seen and done. It was kind of getting to the point of like, cool, another mountain, which is like, sounds kind of ridiculous and also ridiculously privileged, which I acknowledge. But I think that kind of sensation extrapolates out. And for a couple of years, I was just constantly asking myself, like, what for?
Were you searching deep within yourself? Is that why you had this like drive for travel? You were searching,
finding myself,
finding yourself. Do you feel like you got to a point where you like self-actualized a little bit more?
I don't think so. I don't think it was really ever about finding myself. I don't think there is ever at one point in time a true self that you can discover. I think the people that we are.
He also went to school for philosophy.
Yeah,
this is going to be a good conversation.
Sorry, I also am a philosophy major. Majored in French humanism and minored in interpersonal psychology.
You're the most relatable, pretentious person I think I've ever met. Anyways, continue finding yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I've never liked the idea of like finding myself or like saying, oh, I'm a different person now than I used to be. There's kind of these two mentalities that have parsed together just through my various knowing peoples and, you know, experiences throughout my life and learning from other people's experiences. And it's domino theory and string theory. Not string theory, but just like as concepts. I found there are people that look at themselves as a row of dominoes. There's 2019 Steffi. 2019 Steffi is like so different than who I am today. I'm like 2024 Steffi now, and like I'm totally different. And that's just like another domino. And like 2 years from now, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, 2024 Steffi was doing those things. I'm totally different now. I'm 2026 Steffi. And it's just like all of these series of dominoes. And, you know, if you knock over the chain, eventually you get to the current one. But that chain just kind of keeps on going. And I understand that mentality. There's a certain amount of dissociation that is comforting there. You're like, I did all these shitty things. Like, I was so young and naive, and now I'm totally different. And, like, I'm detached from that, and I'm better than that. Or, you know, I've learned from it. But I feel like it tends to be more of a coping mechanism than, like, a healthy acceptance for a lot of people, where you're just kind of trying to detach from the things that you've done, kind of move on in spite of them rather than having acknowledged and accepted them and moving on from them. It's kind of like ignoring them and saying, I'm different now anyway, instead of being
there's
like,
no
this happened
integration.
and I've learned and here I am and it's part of me. And then there's this idea of like a string, or I should say like a ball of twine, where there's kind of, you know, you have this piece of string that was the beginning of you existing. And every experience, this is probably a better way of saying. So you have like a piece of string in your hand, and this is like the first instantiation of you. Everything that you do kind of just adds another wind onto that piece of twine. Another year, made more mistakes, learned more things, had successes. Another year, did this horrible thing that I'm never going to forget and keeps me up at night, and I'm worried that it's going to like ruin my life someday if somebody says something about it. But also, anyway, moving on. And like, those kind of instantiations, like, oh, this is my greatest success. I'm always going to remember when this person told me they were proud of me. And it's all of these things that kind of wrap up, and over the years they get messy and they go in different directions, but they still make up this like ball of twine that you are. And the current day isn't like this totally separate ball of twine. It's just the new, like the most at hand part of that string that you're following. And it might be the case that, you know, that string gets cut and you tie on a totally different color and then keep going. But it's not that, you know, you're totally separate from what's happening now. It's just that all of these things get wrapped up as a part of you.
It's kind of like the idea of history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I feel like that happens with people too, where I like that idea of a piece of twine wrapping around, because it's like when you come back full circle, you kind of see similar patterns. And I feel like patterns don't necessarily, they change, but in a way that like is like a natural progression of something rather than just like out of the blue, you're a completely different person than you were like you said, 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I think this is just my opinion. I think it is healthier and leads to a more secure sense of self to think of yourself as a ball of twine, where you're like, I am just this string of experiences. Who I am now is a culmination of all of the things that I've done. It's not that there is me back when I was a naive kid and now I'm an adult and I'm totally different. It's just, I'm still that naive kid. That naive kid is still in here. It's just there's layers around it.
Hey, we're like onions.
We're like ogres. Yes.
I like that. So did you ever feel like, I guess, when you came around to a certain point of wrapping that twine while traveling, like that you were like, okay, something but you were craving something else?
I think people tend to find different milestones that feel valuable at different points in their lives. I think when I was really dedicated to traveling, it was like, okay, I really want to travel. When I'm home, I'm working to save up money to go travel and do these things. And it was very much like a location-based milestone in my life. It's like, I'm not looking at myself as like, when am I graduating high school? When is my birthday? You know, when is this band coming to town? It was like, when am I going to Korea? When am I going to New Zealand? Like, those are the things, and everything between now and then is working up towards that. Like, those are my life milestones. And that's ignoring like a whole other massive swath of like traumas and tribulations and growing up and mental health and relationships and family stuff, and like ignoring all of that, where this is like a very surface level look at things. I think like that kind of conceptual view is generally relatable, because I think people can extrapolate that into their own lives or relate to that in tangential ways. Eventually, with traveling, to answer your question, I think I got to the point where those location-based milestones just stopped feeling valuable, where it was just like, I would say, what for? And my only answer was to be there. I didn't feel like I had a good reason for it anymore.
That's kind of how I feel about the concept of being famous. For so long, I've broken it down in therapy, and I think it was so just...
Go therapy.
Go therapy. With being famous, that was my equivalent. I need to get to this point to feel validated. I guess for me, it was more like a soul searching kind of thing because I just wanted to be seen. I had to have that question with myself. Okay, like, what am I, why? Why do I want this thing? And it was because, like, as a kid, I never really felt seen. I don't know if you found this with that realization with traveling, but for me, with that realization with being famous, it was kind of a relief. I don't know if that is any way relatable.
No, I totally get that. And like, I've definitely had experiences like that. I don't think with traveling, there definitely wasn't like an aha moment. It was just like, what the hell am I doing?
Okay, now that she's gone, I have more things to share you. This is what I was going to tell you before. Randomly at like 9 p.m. last night in the group chat with myself,
I hope he is.
Steffi, Theo, and my girlfriend Jillian. We get these texts from Steffi. You know, I once knew a guy. Jiggle M titties.
Oh, we should probably wrap up like the tail end of that question.
Oh, yeah.
It was a very dramatic cliffhanger. It's like, did you realize anything about yourself? Anyway, moving on. I think what I was saying was like, I never had a moment where it was just like, aha. It was just kind of like, well, what do I do now? And I think what I found myself gravitating towards is value-based milestones. Like, I just want to be in a place where I feel existentially satisfied, where I'm not like hating existing or feeling like I'm missing something from my life, you know, in a very immediate sense where I think about it constantly, or it just like gnaws at me all the time. It's a much more ambiguous goal to satisfy than I want to go to Disneyland, because you can't just do it.
It takes a certain moment, like that's not curated.
Well, it takes a culmination of moments. It's the ball of twine, you know? You have to wrap yourself up enough that you feel secure with where you're at. He's angry.
Water me now. But yeah, I agree with you.
I'd say there are moments where I feel that, and it goes in and out. I mean, you're not always going to be satisfied with what you're doing, even if you love what you're doing.
Life is about never being satisfied.
I feel like to an extent, life is, maybe not life in general, but I feel a lot of the time I find that myself trying to be satisfied in spite of not being happy, because those aren't necessarily linked, but it's hard to detach them. Where you can be like, I'm not thrilled about everything in my life, but I'm very, like, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Yummy tea.
It's so nice.
That was a good pour. This one has like a certain kind of like mid-tongue flavor that I feel like last ones didn't.
This is lasting a lot longer than I expected. I think we're probably on like 7 or 8 in terms of steep.
Overachieving.
Yeah. It must be the sencha of it. Because the dragon well we had in the other episode, I felt like it lasted like 5 or 6 and it was done. So
can you tell me what, I don't know, what like next steps you're hoping to do with Running Wild tea specifically?
I think it's just to like doing tea tastings, doing more stuff like this, because I also just really like the idea of like Running Wild Tea Co. Having like a music publishing division. I don't know why. I think that would just be so funny. Like if like ASCAP had like a publishing name and under their catalog as Running Wild Tea Co. Like what the fuck? But it's just like a whole bunch of like lo-fi beats. Ooh, one question I do want to ask you. You hear stories about like certain scenes at certain times in life, like with Sub Pop and like Nirvana and like that label coming up with like certain artists, and like Motown with like certain artists, and Muscle Shoals with certain artists. And so, and Nashville obviously has had those scenes generationally where like the same people come up at the same time because they all like knew each other and like are great at the things that they do. Do you see that happening right now with musicians in Nashville or artists in Nashville? Or like a certain group of people that might be
pioneering some kind of new thing, or not even necessarily new, but just pioneering like a culturally significant sound. I don't know. I feel like I'm the least qualified person to answer that question just because I record string sections and jazz.
Kind of a tangential. Are there any like new artists in general that you've come across that you're like, oh, this is going to be really cool? Or like you see very promising?
It's a hard question because I know artists who I personally think are like really incredible musicians and songwriters, but who don't necessarily have like the widespread appeal that sentiment kind of demands, you know? It's like, oh, like this person, like I think they might be big, or like they have a good shot of making it. It's like making it is
I think that also, that definition is so different.
yeah, it's more of like a visual brand thing. It's like, are you marketable? Do you have an appeal that is widely accessible?
And are you consistent?
Right.
Willing to be consistent, I guess.
Yeah, and like I know people who don't necessarily have like that general visual appeal, but are just incredible songwriters and musicians, or who do have that visual appeal, but just aren't doing something that is like super widely consumed. There are some artist communities in town. Studio Rats is one of them, where they foster kind of like a new agey Nashville sound, where it's younger people writing music that still is kind of true to the sentiment of what Nashville songwriting was, where it is very songwriting focused music.
There's one artist that I've been following a little bit. Her name is Chapel Roan.
Okay.
I might have shown you her before. Like, she's kind of a blend, and it sucks to like compare her to other things, but it kind of helps with defining the sound that she gives. Lady Gaga, Lana Del Rey, where it's just like she wants to party, but also
Is sad.
is kind of sad, yeah. And I think what I really like about her is she identifies as queer, and her music is queer, but not at like in your face. I feel like sometimes messaging can be.
Well, kind of, there's a classmate of mine actually from Blackbird. His name's Jesse Felder. He's this just massive dude from Texas. He's probably 6'6" and like built like a brick wall, ex-military. Like he's just this unit of a man.
One full unit.
Yeah. In his 40s, like used to own a restaurant, was like a sommelier for a while. But at the same time, he's like such a sweetheart and like so talented and writes country that like is a really nice blend of old country sounding, but also very like new school country pop sounding. And he moved down here a couple of years ago and was just like, well, sold my restaurant and did my things, and now I'm just here with my family and I'm going to be a musician and I'm just going to do this for a couple of years because I can. He's incredible. Like, he's got one of those voices where you're just like, yeah, I would hear you in a stadium.
I figured a matcha would be a nice way to kind of close out the tasting.
This has been so mesmerizing. I am generally not a huge fan of matcha, but I'm excited to try it.
Well, and it's very like compared to that, I will say it's more of a one note flavor. And luckily, like this stuff, it's the same actually company, Ippodo, that I got the Gen matcha from. This is definitely the best matcha I've ever had. Like, quality in matcha definitely varies. This stuff just tastes so fresh and green, and it feels very much full of vitality. Do you have a favorite movie?
Oh, gosh.
What's like your default answer? The Country Bears, right?
Obviously. My default is probably... my top 3 movies for a long time were like, in no particular order, probably like Kung Fu Panda,
Good.
How to Train Your Dragon, and School of Rock.
Those are good.
Yeah, a lot of Jack Black.
I was about to say, 2 out of 3, Jack Black.
Yeah. Okay, also, how do I drink this?
You just kind of slurp it.
Like slurp out of the bowl?
Yeah. I'm trying to think for like actual, like when I do tea tastings, I want to incorporate matcha. Traditionally, this is how you're supposed to slurp it because you get certain aromatics when you drink it out of a bowl versus like a tiny cup like that. But I might for tastings for like larger groups do like wider saucers. Yeah. And then you can kind of get a similar effect to drinking matcha out of a bowl. I would look into, honestly, like ramekins. This is kind of silly, but like a turkey baster where you can just, and then put it into like a little ramekin. But I'll syringe it. I'll get a syringe that's just like... Flick the tip. Inject. There was one time when I was a barista and I was like learning how to make coffee. And I was trying something with like an iced latte, but I steamed the milk first and then poured it over the latte. I've done it before. Have you? Yeah. And the guy who was training me is like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm experimenting. My pouring steamed milk over ice was not intentional. It's actually something that I think about to this day. So I used to work at this coffee shop. It was actually a chai house, really, in like uptown Minneapolis. There was this repeat client, like this customer who'd come in all the time. And Uncommon Grounds is known for its chai. It's got a really, really like unique and fantastic chai. There was this one particularly wonderful, sassy, and chatty woman who very proudly was a dancer by profession. Well, and she always like came in wearing like the jingliest of all like jewelry and like all kinds of things on her purse, and she was a presence that you wouldn't miss. But we were just like chatting one time,
she was saying something like,
oh my gosh, I love this chai. It's my favorite chai in the whole world. But like, also, if anybody ever screwed it up,
I would never come here again.
and I was like, haha, yeah. And this was like shortly after I'd started. And I was in the middle of like, I was trying to maintain banter because she's a chatter while I was also making her order. So it kind of demanded divided attention. And she always got an iced chai. But the person she had come in with, who was also one of her dancer coworkers, was getting like a hot drink. So I guess I'd like steam the milk in between being distracted by the conversation and making like one hot drink and one cold drink. I used hot milk for both of them. And like literally as she was like,
haha, if anyone ever screwed up my drink, I'd literally never go there ever again.
I f***ed up the drink. They walked out the door and then I realized it. And I literally never saw her again.
Wow, I guess, you know,
And I was like,
you say it, you mean it. Any last word for the people?
Eat gun, shoot steak, America. No, let me say something actual. Wise words with Simon. I guess my wise word is it's okay to be a highly functional, very intelligent idiot.
It sums it up.
Yeah. It's find your idiots.
It's very important to find your idiots.
It makes everything better. I don't have any wisdom to share with the world. I just like my idiots.
I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, then I guess that's my cue.
Okay.
Let's see.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Yes, anytime.
We'll do more of these.
Yes.